The yard rang with the flat clangor of blunted steel, the sound skipping across the frost like stones over a dark lake. Breath steamed from the boys' mouths and rose in ghostly ribbons towards a sky the color of iron. Jon's knuckles stung inside his grips as he met Robb's next stroke and turned it, laughing despite the cold ache blooming in his arms. Ghost flowed at the yard's edge, pale in a world of pale, his red eyes following every step with the impassive patience of winter. "You're lifting," Jon called over their blades, and Robb grimaced, corrected, swept low. The wooden sword struck Jon's greave with a thump dull enough to leave pride more bruised than bone. Jon twisted, weight on the ball of his back foot, and they were at it again, circling in the crisp light while old Ser Rodrik shouted advice and the younger boys watched with cheeks chafed raw. The ravens had begun arriving 2 days ago. Luwin's rookery had filled with a storm of ink and wings until the maester had thrown up his hands and pressed twice as many cut quills into the pages of his ledger. Some had borne simple courtesy from the mountain clans and the petty lords of the rills. Some had been wind-broken oaths of attendance from men who meant to come for the king. A few had reeked of strong wax and southern hands and the perfumed sweep of courts where voices were knives. An odd sweet stink here at Winterfell, like a notched tooth annoying the tongue. It meant the world's eye was turning. It meant the road had spilled its most dangerous travelers northwards, and their breath was about to fog the same air the Starks breathed. Robb fainted, grin flashing, and Jon was slow to the bait, too busy thinking of the banners that would come snaking under Winterfell's walls. Golden lions, crowned stags, seven-tipped stars and green blossoms and men whose sigils meant nothing to him but trouble. Robb's blow caught him at the shoulder, jarred up into his jaw, made his teeth clack. Jon spat red, not much of it, and shook it out of his wrist. "Still brooding," Robb panted. "You'll miss again and blame your brow." "I'll blame your luck," Jon said, and put an end to luck with a clean, hard fouet that learned its way between Robb's guard and his pride. They ended on their backs in the rhyme, laughing and cursing by turns while Ghost padded over to fog their faces and nudge his cold nose against Jon's ear. The direwolf's muzzle glittered where frost had caught coarse whiskers. Somewhere a hammer was beating time from the forge, and the smell of hot iron braided with horse and pine, Winterfell's own sort of incense. "Enough," Ser Rodrik called. "Your arms turn to lead and your feet to rut if you throw more at them. Save what's left for when the king wishes to see what sort of sons the north raises." Their laughter stilled at the word, the same word that had turned every meal into a counting of cups and plates, every hallway into a draft tested thrice, every servant into an urgency. The king. Jon let the wooden sword fall and rubbed the heel of his hand against the ache in his shoulder. He liked the fight, he loathed the waiting. He was still rubbing it when Hullen's boy burst in from the gatehouse stairs, hair struck wild as straw, shouting that the watch had spied a dust plume far down the King's Road. The whole yard pulled towards the sound as though they'd been wired to it. Jon felt himself go with them, giddy as any squire, and checked the feeling with an old habit that had him step a pace aside, slow, as if to tie his boot. He was a bastard. Habits like that kept the edges from cutting. "Fetch Arya," Robb said to someone. "Fetch Sansa and Lady. Tell my lady mother. Tell father." He had no need to tell father. Eddard Stark appeared from the armory passage as though the stones had shaped themselves into him, gray and grave, wearing a look like the sky and the sword that had made the rebellion. The Lord of Winterfell's mouth was a straight line under the Stark short beard. His eyes were measuring Winterfell with the same care he had measured boys' swordplay in a dozen yards and half a life. He found Jon in the yard with a glance that warmed without softening. Jon straightened, knowing there would be work to do. Later, after the bells had shouted the king's coming, and after dresses had been smoothed and hair reeved and 100 boots had beaten the soft snow out of the way, and after the gates had big as a story swung wide, Jon stood and watched the crack and roll of the column. It ate the road and itself together, a serpent swallowing its tail of gold-chased carriages and slow black drays, of mounted retainers with chins high to balance plumes, of Kingsguard immaculate as statues in a September. There was dust in the mouth and a sweet stink of spiced wine to it, and a color that hurt the eyes in Winterfell's old grays. At the column's head rode a man who had eaten too much of life and worn too much of it beside. A great flesh of a man with a black beard riddled with winter and a face fissured like old stone. He laughed as he saw the walls, shook his reins, and pressed his destrier into a canter that sent the gold and black of his cloak flying. It was a good laugh for a hall or a fight or the memory of the one and only woman a man had failed to possess. Robert Baratheon swung down as if the ground were old kin. He caught Eddard Stark in a crush of arms and held him long. Frost smoked up around them. There was nothing like that embrace in any song, nothing like it in any dream, and Jon felt it as he felt the thrum of his own blood. The king's eyes were bright when at last he held Ned at arm's length. There was a boy peering out of the lines, and the boy had not learned to be king. They went to the crypts, as men like that must. Down into the North's black belly where cold did not go away with fires. Jon was not asked to go. He was not surprised that he was not asked. He watched them vanish with the lantern and the light, and it seemed to him that the shadows behind them left the stones changed. Cersei Lannister's eyes did not change, because they were already the color of polished malice. She descended last in a litter like a ship blackly whole amid winter's shoal, and when her bearers set her down she unfolded from it with the grace of an unsheathed dagger. Joffrey fell in her shadow, long-limbed and sharp as a colt and already showing the cruel mouth of a man who cannot be pleased. Myrcella was all shy gold, Tommen pink with curiosity. Jaime Lannister, bright as a coin, took the yard as if it had been made to set him off. Tyrion Lannister flung his short leg over a horse that was smaller than the rest but too proud for it and laughed at whatever the wind said to him. Jon bowed to the queen with the rigid exactness he had learned to drape over himself like an extra cloak. Her gaze brushed him and slid warm with contempt. Jaime's brushed and lingered a heartbeat. Tyrion stuck, and he watched Jon the way a man watches a mirror he is not sure is honest. "Who is that?" Cersei asked in a tone like preventing a stain. Eddard was not there to answer. Catelyn Stark's mouth was too tight to form a name. It was Robb who said, proudly because he had never learned anything else, "My brother, Jon." "Bastard," Joffrey murmured, enjoying the taste of the word like toffee. Jon let the word roll past him like smoke through trees, and when he met Joffrey's gaze he did not do what Theon would have done, raise an eyebrow, or what Arya would have done, stick out a tongue. He did something worse. He smiled. Night found the feasting hall hung with light and roaring with the tame wolves of men. Meat smoked, cups rose, and old songs were forced down young throats. Robert drank as though he meant to strangle grief with honey and barley. Cersei drank as though wine were a duty. Jon stood where shadows collected themselves near the back of the hall and watched, a smile carefully arranged and empty of teeth. He had been content to do as he always did, set himself where he could be least in the way and most of use. Then Robert gestured for more meat and found none. Jon moved before the scullion, light on his feet. The platter was hot. He bore it without a flinch and lowered it onto the trestle in a space cleared by a knife flick of the king's own hand. Robert's eyes had been roving the hall. They fixed now and narrowed slightly, as if a name had just found its way out of a crumpled song. "You're the snow," he said through grease. "Ned's winter seed." He grinned. "You're taller than I like a bastard to be." "Your grace," Jon replied, steady, bowing his head just enough. Robert laughed and slapped a handful of meat onto his trencher. "Has he taught you to use that height?" "He is teaching me, your grace." Jon did not look at Catelyn to see whether she flinched. He kept his eyes on the man who had broken a dynasty with his hammer and the promise of love. "Good." Robert turned to where Eddard had been studying the curve of his cup, as if to find in it an answer to an older question. "The boy has a wolf to keep, Ned, doesn't he?" "All my children do, your grace," Ned said. He put the cup down. He did not quite smile. It moved something in his face that remembered summer. Robert stared at Jon for a breath. He had a way of holding still that was at odds with his size, like a mountain pausing for the mountain's own counsel. "Eat," he said then, and turned his appetite where it consoled him. Jon did not stay long. He had learned there was only so much of the hall that was his to use without taking more than belonged to him. He slipped towards the door and Ghost flowed after, white through the moving shadows as easily as milk poured from a black pitcher. The god's wood was older than kings. Snow sifted there where no snow fell in the yard. A hush as if the leaves remembered speaking to souls and missed the sound. Jon sat under the weirwood's bleeding face and felt the old, ridiculous calm he felt there, as if something watched him with a care so terrible it had no human name. Ghost put his head in Jon's lap, heavy and warm, and when Jon looked up he found he was not alone. Eddard Stark stood on the path with his breath fading as he came, slow and careful in the dark like a man coming to his own confession. "I told him," he said without preamble. The words hung white and drifted away. Jon did not move. "My lord," it was the safest thing to say. It shredded a little in his throat. "I told the king your mother's name," Ned said, and the weirwood breathed and did not breathe, and Jon heard his own heart make a sound like surprise. "And the man who sired you." Ned's face took the blow of that truth and did not flinch. He had been waiting to take it. Jon's hands curled into Ghost's rough of their own accord. "Why now?" "Because he asked me to serve as hand." Ned's mouth shaped the syllable as if it pained him. "Because if I go south, Catelyn fears for you. Because Robert Baratheon is my oldest friend and a dangerous man, and I cannot keep a secret under his roof that might undo you when I am not there to get between teeth and throat." Jon closed his eyes and tasted iron, as if the cold had bled into his mouth. "Who?" "Lyanna." Ned rarely said her name. It came out like the sound a sword makes when a smith draws it to test the temper. "Lyanna Stark."
100 moments tumblad.
100 looks. The way Catelyn's hand turned in on itself when he stood. The way Benjen had stared and said nothing on long rides, his eyes far. The way Father's face had shut like a gate at certain words. Jon had always believed at least this, that his mother was lowborn and nameless, and that his father had erred once and paid the price without complaint, to keep a promise. He had been angry at the promise, and then ashamed, and then comfortable within it as an orphan will make himself comfortable on a bed of straw. "Rhaegar," Ned said gently, and the world tipped. Ghost shifted, and Jon held on to him so that he might not fall out of his own skull. He was in a story now. He was looking out of someone else's eyes at the ghost of a crown made of rubies and the soft sound of a harp and a woman's laughter that was his to claim and not his to claim at all. Why would he? Jon began, and the question had too many edges. "He took her," Ned said, and old anger burned in the word. "Or she went of her own foolish heart. The truth went into the ground with her." He breathed once. "He died on the trident. She died in a bed of blood. What lived was put into my hands." "You have put it into mine," Jon said. His voice did not sound like his. No, Ned's voice sharpened and softened in the same breath. "I have put it into Robert's and into the gods. We will see which hand breaks. I am a bastard. You are my son," Ned said fiercely, as if to snarl the past into obedience. "And Robert loved my sister. He will not kill her child." "You think he will keep that love?" Jon said, and then could not help the dry curl of the words. "He is a king, father." "So am I," Ned said, so quietly that Jon could not tell if he had heard it or if the tree had whispered it into the cold. "In my fashion. I will not see you strangled by a promise that was mine to carry." He stepped closer, and the old gods watched without moving. "Robert means to make a gesture," he said. "He is tired of Lannister claws in his bed and his counsel. He thinks of the Reach as a field he can reap and drink, of the North as a rock he can lean his back on. He wants to put you between him and their teeth. He will call it love." "And you will let him?" Jon asked. He stood because he could not stand to be smaller in the presence of such words. Ghost rose with him, heavy breath punching white into the night. "I will make of whatever he gives you a shield," Ned said, "which is what I have always done with what little this world gives." "Jon," he swallowed a truth. "He will legitimize you." The word threw frost into Jon's lungs. Came with pain. Came with hope. felt like an amputation. By what name? Jon heard himself ask, and the evenness in the tone was a thing he could not have achieved 6 months ago. By your own, Ned said. He does not know, yet, the name that belongs to you in the South songs. He will make you Stark. And what else? Ned's eyes flicked to the bleeding face of the tree. He wants to give you Dragonstone, he said at last, and the title that comes with it. Jon had been cold. He discovered then how cold the North could be. He laughed once, the sound dry, more cough than mirth. Prince, he said, and it felt absurd. Of Dragonstone. The last of that title died in a smoking ruin near the God's Eye, Ned said, and some old sorrow moved under the words. But titles can be dragged out of death, like everything else. Jon imagined the needle of basalt rising from a black sea he had never seen, and the old dragons asleep there in bones and rot. He imagined men kneeling and a crown somewhere overhead like a blade. He imagined Cersei Lannister's mouth and Joffrey's fists. He imagined Stannis Baratheon, grim as a knife left out on a winter sill, standing on a seawall and saying, "This is theft. What do you want?" Jon asked at last. Ned put his hand on Jon's shoulder, and it was as if a man placed his palm on a piece of iron he had decided finally not to throw away. "I want you to live," he said simply, "to have a name no one may take from you, to be too valuable to kill easily, to have a place in the world where you need not ask what you may touch." "You could have given me your name," Jon said. He had never said it. It came out without venom and with no small astonishment that he could say it at all. "You did not."
Ned inhaled.
"I could not," he said, "and I would not, for reasons it is too late to hate me for." He looked up into the tree's face as if to ask it if the words were enough. "Let me give you this." Jon thought of Robb's laugh and Sansa's delicate pride and Arya's wild joy. Of Bran's mouth open at bedtime, trusting sleep to find him. Of Catelyn's hand and the way it closed. He thought of Ghost at his knee, and of the way the world leaped when he swung a practiced sword at empty air. He thought of a woman he had never known and a harp he had never heard. He thought of the king's eyes when they had found him across the meat. It all seemed to lead to a shore he did not recognize. "I am yours," he said. "I have always been. I will be what you make me." "No," Ned said, and for the first time that night he smiled, quick and cracked and beautiful. "You will be what you make yourself, Jon. But I will not let this world call you less." It was in the great hall at noon the next day that the king made his gesture. There had been a stillness all morning, the stillness that comes when men learn that they will be asked to hold their breath. Servants moved as if the floor had been polished with oil. Luwin wore his best chain with the link of black iron cool on his wrist as he went back and forth to his tower. Catelyn Stark lay in her bedchamber like a woman in childbed with no child to bear, eyes dry and hands clenched. Robb paced. Arya had to be found twice. Sansa cried when told to keep her needlework neat. Bran climbed and would not come down when Hollard shouted for him from the yard. So Theon laughed and climbed after him, and 2 minutes later you could hear the scrape of skin and pride over the stones where one boy had chased the other down, swearing that he would not break his neck for a sight better left to birds. The king sat at the high table with the light behind him. It made a crown of his hair for a moment, and Jon, standing to one side with Ghost at his heel, thought wryly that the gods had a sense of humor. Robert raised a hand and pushed aside a trencher he had not touched. "Lord Eddard Stark is a man I love as I love my own soul," he said, too loud for the hall, and every head lifted. "I have asked him to serve me as hand. If he had any sense, he would tell me to drink snow and ride to the Vale and take a mistress." Laughter ran, thin and nervous. Robert's mouth twitched. He looked older than last night. He looked hungrier. "We will also make a thing right," he said, and the words drew a taut line through the hall. Cersei's hands were a statue's. Jaime had the look of a cat in a sunbeam. Tyrion set his elbows on his table and watched. "There is a boy in this hall who has eaten with dogs when he should have eaten with men," Robert said, "who has learned to step aside when purses are unknotted and plates are counted and children put to bed. He has done it with grace. He has the wolf's look when he holds a sword. He is Eddard Stark's flesh and Lyanna Stark's blood. It was like ramming a lance into a hog. The noise. The way someone's breath broke like glass. Eddard Stark did not move. Catelyn Stark's absence was a presence. "I will not have a boy like that nameless," Robert said, and his voice softened, perhaps because he heard in his own words the echo of a girl's laughter. "I, Robert of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, do herewith declare Jon Snow trueborn and acknowledge him as a son of Eddard Stark with all honors and rights of the same." The word struck like a hammer to iron. Men turned and measured Jon as if measuring a blade brought unexpectedly into market. He felt eyes like pressure on his skin. Ghost was a still weight at his side. "The North will keep him well enough," Robert went on. "But the realm is a wolf with many mouths and a crown with many teeth. To guard him from one and satisfy the other, we will give him Dragonstone and the style and seat that come with it. Henceforth let him be known as Jon of the House Stark, Prince of Dragonstone, to have and to hold as any prince has held since the first dragons flew. If the air had been tight before, it broke now." Luwin was on his feet before he knew he had moved. His face gone oddly blank, tongue working to form a protest that was not his to make. The Great Lords exchanged looks like coins changing hands under a table. Cersei Lannister's face went beautiful as a sheet of new ice. Light struck it and slid. Joffrey's mouth curled. Eddard Stark stood very still. Jon did not move at all. "Come," Robert said, gesturing with his thick fingers. "Take the knee, boy." Jon thought of 100 things, but what he did was simple. He walked forward through the press like a man walking through snow he had measured with a stick. When he reached the step, he sank onto one knee and set his eyes not on the throne but on the floor, as if reading some old script under the straw. The floor told him nothing except that it had been polished with beer and the patience of men who would never kneel before anything but a lord's words. Robert's hand came down heavy on his hair, an anointing of oil and ale. "Rise, Prince," he said, and Jon did. He had not known until then that standing could feel like falling. The congratulations came as snow comes in March. Fat, cold, and not meant to stay. The first was Robb's, fierce and bewildered and joyful. In the crush of men, Jon caught his brother's shoulder and gripped it, and something old and good passed between them without a name. Arya's was next. She threw her arms about his waist and whispered in a fierce hiss that he would need a better sword and she would steal one for him if necessary. Sansa's curtsy was perfect and her eyes bright with tears that Jon was not sure she had chosen. Theon grinned like a wolf on a chain and swore the prince would need a reaver to show him the sea. The bastard of Winterfell endured it all with a smile he had learned last year and remade this morning. Catelyn did not come down to the hall. When Jon went, later, to her chamber with a guard of silence in his wake, the woman who opened the door to him was not the woman who had stood with him at Bran's naming day, and not the one who had taught Sansa that needlework was a map a lady made for her destiny. There were no ladies now. There was only a mother whose world had just been unmade in some private way no decree could understand. "You will go south," she said when he bowed, and did not ask if she might call him son. "And you will not return." He drew breath. "Lady Stark, do not," she said softly, the word insufferable and exhausted at once. "Do not call me that now, not here." She sat, the stiff-backed chair refusing her, and folded her fingers until all the feeling was driven from them. When she looked at him, her eyes were raw and clear. "You were a stranger in my house, and I was a stranger in yours. This is a kindness if I am to search for one. Take it. Let me believe that my children will not always look at you and wonder whose hand pulls their fate." He had thought of a dozen things he might say. They crumbled when laid on the heat of her grief. "I have never wanted to hurt you," he said, and hated that it sounded childish, inadequate. "I have wanted everything but this," she replied. "Go, Jon. Be prince. Be dragon. Be whatever the South needs of you, so long as the North may endure." She closed her eyes, and he bowed himself away and was glad to flee the room. Word flies faster than ravens when it is born in a hall. By early evening Pycelle in King's Landing had the news in his plump hands and sent copies that sweated wax and flattery to men whose faces were already set to disapprove. By midnight Stannis Baratheon was striding up and down a sea-washed tower in Dragonstone with a mouth like a shut fist while his master-at-arms, Ser Davos Seaworth, listened with an unmoved face and thought of sons. In the Rock, a candle dripped fat and bright while a man in lion-colored velvet wrote in a hand that broke words like bones. In the Red Keep, a eunuch smiled with his eyes and sent a boy to bed. Winterfell still slept like a man with one eye open. Bran fell the next day. He had been climbing, he had always climbed. It was who he was, the only time his face ever forgot to watch itself. He fell after men were heard in the deserted tower, voices that no servant could place and which the maester would later pretend he had never heard mentioned. He fell, and the world made a sound as if some larger thing had snapped. Catelyn forgot that she had a prince under her roof and moved into the sick room, where she spoke to the gods like a debt collector and forgot the other books she had left open. The king meant to leave in a week. He left in 9 days because grief had slowed nothing and everything at once. Eddard Stark rode beside him with lines gouged into his face that had not been there before. Jon rode under a different banner than he had ever known. The dire wolf quartered with a crowned stag that had been chased hastily onto a pennon, as if last night's talk had not been done being hammered out. Most of Winterfell turned out to watch them pass. The air was full of the sound of goodbyes that no one ever says properly. Arya loosed Sansa's hands to kiss Jon's cheek and murmured, "Don't let them make you frown all the time." And Sansa said something like, "Be careful, and your grace," in a gush that surprised her into laughter with tears already on her lashes. Robb held his brother hard then, and if their words were thin or foolish, the grip meant more than anything. Catelyn came down as far as the inner gate. She did not kiss him. She looked at him and inclined her head a fraction of a degree, as one noble might to another, and Jon returned it with the courtesy of a man who had learned more of this world in 9 days than he had dared expect to learn in 9 years. The King's Road was a broken scar across the north, old and angry, and the royal party crawled south along it like something across a wound. The Hound rode near the boy king with his raw dog face turned always towards threat. He looked often towards Jon, as if uncertain which side of a battle would pay him better. Jaime Lannister's gold caught every poor ray of sun. Tyrion Lannister made friends with the ditches and the wind and any wit that would meet his in the middle. He found Jon as they camped above the Trident one dusk. Ghost watched him come, head cocked minutely. Tyrion halted 3 paces out and bowed with a flourish more elaborate than any the king had bothered with in Winterfell. "Your Highness," he said, savoring the salt on the word. Jon had been sharpening a new sword, steel this time, not wood, and looked up with polite surprise. His hair had begun to grow a hint longer because the king had muttered, "Vat it to your shoulders. Princes have more hair than bastards." And Ned had sighed and said nothing. "I am not accustomed to the style," Jon said. "No one is," Tyrion replied easily, perching himself on a rock. "Not even the king. He will like the way it tastes today and hate it on his tongue tomorrow. Are you offended when I say so?" "I am relieved," Jon said honestly. "There is only so much I can pretend to be used to at once." Tyrion grinned. "Wise, if you cannot be what you're made, at least know what you are not." He studied the boy. "You look like him, you know." "If you mean Lord Stark," Jon began. "I mean Rhaegar," Tyrion said, and Jon's hands tightened on the whetstone without moving. "Or what paintings claim of him. He is all rubies and light in them, of course. The living men I have met who had their likeness taken claim all painters are liars." He lifted one shoulder. "Still, there is something around the eyes, the part that is not looking outward." Jon's breath fogged. The night nipped it away. "You know," he said after a moment, "I could add it," Tyrion said, "to the list of things I know that might kill me if I knew them too loudly. It would be a long list and a dull death. But yes, Varys hums when he keeps secrets. You may have heard the tune faintly." "The king knows," Jon said. "Does he?" Tyrion's eyebrows hopped. "Does he know what it means?" But I ask a mountain to interpret a songbird. My sister knows nothing and everything in the same breath." My brother prides himself on knowing the value of his own reflection. Men in love with their own faces always misread other people's. And then there is your uncle." He paused delicately, as if not to break a cup. "Lord Stannis will find a law to stand on like a drowning man grabbing a rock." "I will not drown," Jon said. Not a boast, but a stubborn fact he meant to make true. "If the king gives me an oar and calls it Dragonstone, perhaps I can learn to paddle." Tyrion laughed at that, genuinely, almost kindly. "Learn fast," he said, getting to his feet. "You are paddling in a pond full of pikes, Your Highness." Arya and Joffrey came to blows 2 days later. It was over something small, as large things always are. A boy with a bull's strength and a butcher's delight had been set to spar with them by the river, and Arya had taken the wrong delight in him. Joffrey had taken less delight in being bruised by a small girl. He struck her. She struck back, with a stick in her teeth and the heat that lived under her skin and made a future that would not easily be made tame. Nymeria was there in a blink, white teeth and gray blur, and then Jon was there with his hand around Joffrey's wrist and his knee planted and the stick in his own palm. "Enough," he said, the word a solid thing that rolled through the trees. Ghost moved, a white threat, and the hound swore softly and drew his horse up hard. "Enough," Jon said again, softer to Arya, and her eyes, wild and bright, found his. She spit blood onto the leaf litter, then wiped her face on her sleeve and glared glory at the world. Joffrey yanked his hand and failed to free it. "Unhand me," he hissed, voice breaking, proud and petulant in the same breath. "You think your new title lets you lay fingers on a future king? I think it obliges me to keep the peace," Jon said, and the sentence felt like a stone he had to lift with both hands. "You've had your sport. That's enough." He opened his fingers. Joffrey flung back, red with fury and humiliation. He would remember. Boys like that never forget the wrong halves of stories. It was Cersei who made memory into sentence. She rode into camp at dusk, hair bright as a threat, and demanded the head of a direwolf because none would dare give her the head she truly wanted. The king was drunk and the queen was sober enough to make decisions. Eddard Stark's face did something old and terrible as he heard the talks. When it was clear they would kill a wolf, Joffrey's throbbing pride made that much obvious. Jon stepped forward as instinct stepped for him. "Take Ghost," he said before thinking, and Ghost, trusting his breath, turned his head towards him. "He is mine to give, and I am yours to command." "No," Arya said in a whisper that had none of Sansa's grace and all of a sword's edge. "No," Ned said, and that moved Cersei's mouth. "It must be Lady," she said delicately. "A girl's pet, fitting." There was triumph in it no one would fail to hear. Men make little victories and give them crown enough to excuse their losses. The hound did the killing, impassive as a butcher. Sansa hated her sister for a week that felt like a year. Joffrey watched Jon as the hound carried the pelt away and smiled like a boy playing at executioner. Jon held the gaze and did not flinch. He did not go to Arya that night. He went to Sansa's tent and stood outside until she came at last, eyes swollen. He did not speak. He did not know what would help. He bowed to her like a brother. She made a sound that might have been a thank you and walked past him without a word. When they came to King's Landing, the smell hit like a living thing. Wrought of 1,000 old meals and 1,000,000 lives, sweet tar and old piss, spices crowded like mummers in a lane, flowers somewhere under the filth. The Red Keep was a red wound on a red hill. At sundown it looked like a thing that had bled for a long time and learned to live with the pain. Jon walked the halls like a prisoner with keys in his hand. Men bowed and did not bow, guessing what it would profit them. The small council took him in sideways glances like a mouth trying a new taste. Varys rolled words across his tongue like a man rolling coins. Littlefinger smiled too much and watched how Jon watched Sansa and Arya. He filed it away. Renly Baratheon dazzled with his broad, effortless ease and smelled of soap. Stannis did not come to court. He sent letters instead, iron in ink, and a silence that could cut bread. Robert named Ned Hand, set the pin on his breast with fingers that shook because Robert had always drunk to forget he was a man with tasks. He slapped Jon's shoulder with fond brutality and demanded he come to the yard to prove he had not learned all his skill in the snow. Jon obliged, finding his footwork altered by heat and stone. Ser Barristan tested him gently, like a man testing the temper in a freshly quenched blade. "Tighten your left," he murmured. "You leave a door there." Jon tightened. The doors of the Red Keep did not like to be shut on anything. Cersei plotted where the light was kind to her skin. With every glance at the Prince of Dragonstone, her jaw set slightly more. Myrcella brought him a flower once, pink as a child's good dream. The queen watched and smiled and took the blossom from her daughter's hand and placed it into a vase on her table and let it die there unwatered. Letters came like rain. From the veil, Lisa's hand, all irrational loops, full of fear and promise and venom. From Riverrun, Hoster Tully's heavy, wet-seeming script, inquiring after the health of his grandchildren with a stiffness that carried old disapproval. From Pike, Balon Greyjoy's hard-ridged scrawl, making a courtesy that was not, congratulating the king on a prince and sniffing southwards with old hunger. From Sunspear, heat in words, thoughtfully cool to a realm that had murdered its princess. From Dragonstone, Stannis again. Always Stannis. He demanded the law. He demanded the line of succession be a rope, not a weave. He demanded that titles be used properly and not to appease northern sentiment and the king's guilt. He did not say what men thought he must be thinking, that he had held Dragonstone during the siege, that he had starved nobly while Renly ate, that he lived on salt and certainty, and his reward was to watch a boy he had not begotten sit on a rock that had ground his teeth down. Robert ignored him as one ignores a pain in a tooth that has not yet promised to turn to agony. "Let him sulk," Robert said. "It is what Stannis does best." He lifted a cup. "Besides, we could do worse than putting a wolf on the old dragon's perch. It will make the realm's less nervous circle look twice." He gestured vaguely. "And it pleases me to please Lyanna." He said her name more often now. It made men in the hall shift on their feet like children needing to piss and not knowing where to go. Cersei's mouth was a thin white scratch when he did. Ned's eyes went dark. "You are not giving a boy a name," Ned said to Robert under a fig tree one afternoon, while the heat made the stones smell like old bread. "You are making him a target." "I made him a target the moment I let him live," Robert said roughly. "I may as well give him a shield." He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "He looks like," he swallowed. "He looks like someone I used to hate." He laughed at himself then, without joy. "I am too old not to know the difference between a boy and the dream that hurt me." "Then keep him close," Ned said. "Teach him to read a council chamber the way I taught him to read a blade. Teach him which smile hides a knife." "Are you asking me to be a father again, Ned?" Robert said, and no jest at all in it. Ned did not answer. The fig leaves were glossy in the light. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a singer was committing a murder on a lute. Jon listened as much as he used his sword. He listened to Ricardo in the yard curse the heat in Dothraki, and to the cook curse the same heat in the common tongue. He listened to a squire complain about a knight, and a knight complain about his wife, and a wife complain about the price of cinnamon. If Varys was a spider with 100 thread-fine ears, Jon became a boy with 2 ears he used. Ghost learned the map of the castle as if the rock itself had spoken it to him. He padded past doors and stopped sometimes, head slanting, and then moved on. He did not like the Queen's chambers. He did not like the room where the small council ate. He liked the Godswood with a fierceness that made Jon ache. Syrio Farrell called Arya boy, and taught her to be many things she already was and put names to them. She came to Jon flushed and alive the way the yard had left him flushed at the age of 13. Sansa learned graces that were real but which she would have to use like weapons in a fight she did not yet see. Joffrey learned to toy with knives. Tommen learned to keep out of his brother's way. Myrcella learned to survive by smiling. The court learned to call Jon my prince when it suited them and the northern bastard when it did not. It was hunting that killed the king, or it was the queen, or it was time. ready to lay a finger on a man who had evaded it too long by drinking and laughing and pretending that the bed he lay in at night did not belong to his enemy. At first it was only a letter. We will hunt in the Kingswood. My hand must not scowl at me for being a man. While the king roared at boars with a spear as unsteady as his hand, letters came to the Red Keep in other hands. One of them went to John. A small thing, lowly neat, anonymous, telling him to beware dark wine and the smiling of men with soft feet. He took it to Ned. Ned read it and folded it and unfolded it, and then he set it to the candle and watched it go up. "Get to the king," he said, not as a lord, not as a father, but as the only sensible man remaining. "Go with him." "I am a poor hunter," John said. "You are not there to bring him boars." Ned's mouth tightened. "The hound is with him. That is to the good. The king's guard are with him. That is better still. But you will be with him as well." He touched John's shoulder, almost absently, as if placing him on a board. "Be wary." The forest was a cathedral of green heat and flies. The men in it were old noises made anew because men never tired of making them. Shouts, laughter, curses, the clung clatter of gear. Robert sweated and sang and shoved men and grabbed cups. Once he put his arm around John's shoulder and shook him, affection heavy enough to bruise. "You are too serious," he told the boy. "A prince must learn to laugh at his own death." "I have not met it yet," John replied dryly. Robert bellowed. "You will. Better it meet you laughing than crying." When the boar came, it came like a low thunder, and the heat broke around it. It charged, a fierce slab of malice, foam and bristle, and the king tossed his cup and took his spear like a stubborn fool. The boar took him, too, and the spear took it, each doing what they had been born to do. The hound was there, fast as a disaster is fast. The white cloaks moved. Men shouted. John saw red. Then he was kneeling in a hot stink of blood with his hands pressed to a hole that had opened in a man's side too close to his heart. And the king was laughing and gasping and swearing at the same time. "They'll sing about this one," Robert wheezed. "Gods, I hope they sing well. Get me a pen, boy. Get me my hand." John did not run. Walking was faster, because other men made way for a boy who looked like someone they thought they should know and whose hands were red and gentle. He found Ned and pushed the words through his throat. He found paper and a quill and a seal. He found a tent and a bed and the sound of syllables hammered into iron by a dying man who had sworn to love a woman and had loved a realm instead. "Put down what I say," Robert commanded. His color was wrong. It was like something had been pulled out of him and left him a husk with a voice. "I do hereby make." He paused, frowned, belched weakly. "I do hereby name John." The pause stretched. "John of the House Stark, Prince of Dragonstone, to be protector of the realm and my heir until..." There was more. The law wanted more. "Until my son comes of age." He laughed then, a harsh bark full of mean humor. "Which son, Ned?" "Which one? I have 100, I expect." His hand flapped. "No. Leave off. The realm will sort it." He swallowed. "And keep your children safe. All of them." He closed his eyes and breathed a sound like a man putting down a heavy sack. Ned wrote. His hand was steady where the king's was not. He sealed it as he would any other document that might alter a winter. He looked down at it once as if to measure if there was enough wax to hold the world together. Then he looked at John. "Take it to the council," he said. "No, give it into my hands at court. Not before. There are too many knives in this forest." Robert died in his bed hours later, with men who loved him at the first and hated him at the last singing him to sleep with songs about himself. When the noise finally stilled, he looked like a man who had labored at a difficult thing and was annoyed to see it unfinished. The storm he had kept at bay broke when he could no longer shout at it. Cersei's eyes were dry and bright as diamonds as she took the paper from Ned's hand in the council and read it with lips that did not move and then crumpled it very gently before handing it to Ser Boros Blunt, who bowed and did not flush as he took a Kingswool like rubbish. Littlefinger smiled and suggested the city watch might be of use in keeping the peace. Varys tooted. Renly shrugged. Pycelle blustered about tradition. Jon stood very straight because it was how he knew to be defiant without the need to speak. "Your son is not the king's," Ned said at last, because it had to be said. He said it with a quiet that made men lean forward to hear, which made it worse. "He is Jaime's." He might as well have put a torch to a storehouse. Silence exploded. Cersei stepped into it like a dancer stepping into a beat. "You think these men will protect you from the truth?" she asked, and when she smiled there was old steel in it. "You think this letter will wrap itself around your bastard like swaddling? You are a poor man in a city you do not understand, Eddard Stark." She turned her head. The room moved with her eyes. "Seize them," she said. Littlefinger had done his work. Janos Slint came with gold on his shoulders and gold in his heart. The City Watch changed their allegiance the way fish change direction in schooling water. Steel whispered, then shouted. Barristan stepped once, half a step only, and stopped as if he had been checked by a hand only he could feel. Renly had already made himself scarce. He would later make a speech about prudence and live because of it. Varys watched as if measuring whether the room were large enough to contain what it had become. Jon did not move as the spears turned. He could hear his own breath and Ghost's low, steady growl the way a man hears the sea when he falls into sleep on a ship. He could see that Littlefinger watched him, not out of hate or love but out of habit. Littlefinger watched everyone he imagined might someday owe him. He could see that Cersei hated him as she hated any woman more beautiful than herself. He could see that Ned meant to do something honorable and ruinous. "Stay," Ned said, not looking at him as the gold cloaks took hold. Ghost leapt. The room broke into streams of motion. Men cried out because there is something childhood fearful about a wolf's sudden violence. Something that makes the heart remember how it beat when the first man saw the first predator and learned how to run. Ghost's jaws found a wrist that held a blade near Jon's neck and broke it before the owner had quite understood he was in a fight. Jon moved into the space Ghost had made for him. He had been taught to move like water. He moved like a cold stream cutting stone. It is not easy to fight men you do not wish to kill. It is less easy when you are a boy and the men are grown and have the permission of their queen to make you dead. Jon ducked, turned, and felt the hot line of a cut across his cheek where a sword had been an instant late. He lunged without thinking and drove his shoulder into a man's ribs. The air went out of the man and his blade went up and away. Barristan was suddenly there, white fury in a white cloak, old limbs turned quick as a story lies. He took the flat of his blade to the back of a helmet and made a bell out of a man's skull. "Go," he said to Jon, a command from a father who had never fathered him. "The hand will find his fate. Yours is elsewhere." "My father," Jon began, and the word nearly betrayed him into a cut he did not see. Barristan turned that blade too and glared the boy into sense. "Your father is a noble man," he snapped. "Nobility is a disease that does not always take two in a family. Run, Prince." Jon ran. Ghost was at his side, a pale shadow that made other shadows more dangerous. The Red Keep was a maze, but he had learned its turns the way Ghost learned them. He did not try the main stair. He took a corridor that sloped down, the stones damp and old, where the wall sweated. He heard men shouting his name. He thought of Arya and Steel, and of Sansa and songs, and of the way the look on Ned's face had not been fear but grief. Varys slid out of the wall the way perfume slides out of a bottle. "My prince," he murmured, and Jon did not stop. "Left," Varys advised. "There will be less blood if you go left." "Whose?" Jon heard himself ask. "Yours," Varys said and smiled sadly. They took a stair that smelt of old oil. They passed a door where a girl cried quietly and a man asked pardon with each thrust. Jon bit down on the taste of iron in his mouth until it went away. He came at last into a forgotten room where the plaster had bubbled like bad porridge and the light made a slow effort through a high grill. "Here," Varys said. "You must go to the sea, my prince." "To Dragonstone?" Jon asked with a bleak humor. "To my rock." "Will Stannis receive me with bread and salt or with rope?" "Lord Stannis will receive you as he receives the law," Varys said delicately. "Imperfectly, but he will receive you." And there is Davos there, who understands bread, and men like bread better than rope. He glanced down as Ghost padded past him with the courtesy of a murderer who will not kill if he is not obliged. I have chartered a ship. You made arrangements for a future you claim you do not control, Jon said. I make arrangements for many futures, Varys said sadly, most of which will not come to pass. This one might. Please hurry. There was another fight, more desperate and dirtier, in a lane that stank of fish and old wine. The gold cloaks were less brave in dark places. Their bits of gold did not gleam as much. Ghost took another wrist and a throat. A man tried to hamstring the direwolf, and Jon stepped on his hand and used a stone rather than steel because there were people in windows and people remember blood differently when it lives on in stories. Another man said, "Your Highness," in a voice that pleaded for something he did not get time to name, and then slumped when he saw Ghost's eyes. The ship was called the Salt Widow, and she had been old even when the Dance of Dragons was being written into children's fears. The captain was a woman with a mouth like a wound and eyes like coin-flip futures. She took Jon's gold without counting it and Varys's bow without believing it, and stumped away to shout at men who obeyed her because she had a way of using curses that left men grateful to her for not killing them. In the dark of the hold, the air was a different thing than it had been in the hall. It was heavy and wet, and it tasted of hooks and strange trees far off. Jon sat with his back to a barrel and let Ghost lay his head on his knee. He had left his father to honor and peril. He had left his sisters in a nest with a snake. He had left his brother lord of a hall that might be called to war by ravens sent by a man with a lion on his seal. He had taken a title and turned it into a direction. "What are we?" he asked the dark softly. The ship groaned as if it were answering. Ghost's breath was slow and deep. "Alive," he said at last. "Alive is something." Dragonstone rose out of dawn like a thing remembered badly, all angles and fangs, black against a sky where the tarnished silver of morning lay over the sea. Jon stood at the prow with the wind knifing his cloak open and watched as it took shape. The gods in the rock did not feel like his gods. They felt old in a different way than the weirwood. The rock had been made by men who thought of fear as art. It had been taken by men who thought of siege as scripture. Stannis Baratheon received him in a hall that made men look small. He wore a plain surcoat and had a face that seemed perpetually on the verge of flinching from an insult. Davos stood at his shoulder, unassuming as always, and had too many fingers on one hand. "Your Grace," Stannis said without a trace of grace, and Jon understood at once that Stannis knew the proper forms and would use them as a flail. "You are bold to come." "I have little choice," Jon said. "The Queen calls for my head. The hand has been—" He stopped. He did not know what to call Ned's state. He did not know if he were prisoned or dead. No ravens had beaten the sea to Dragonstone with that news yet. "The Queen calls for many heads," Stannis said. "She prefers those without crowns on them. You have the sense not to have worn yours in the street. That is to the good." He considered Jon as one considers a cut of meat, weighing, suspicious, hungry in a way he would not name. "You have something that belongs to me." Jon lifted his chin. "Dragonstone belongs to the crown. The king gave it to me." "The king gave things to men he liked," Stannis said flatly. "He liked few men with more discernment than he showed in choosing a wife." Davos coughed softly, and almost warning. Stannis's jaw hardened. "I served here while you were nursing at a she-wolf and learning to swing a stick. I was given it because my nursing and my stick are of use to the realm," Jon said, trying the tone he had heard Ned use with men who would only respect the tone. "If you wish it back, take it back when the king bids you do so. Until he does, we will use it for the purpose men always use rocks, to keep the sea out." A small silence, delicate and shocked, opened in the room. Someone who had not seen Stannis smile in a year almost hoped to. He did not. He merely shifted his weight and found that it did not hurt as much as it might to meet a boy's insolence with the recognition that insolence can sometimes be a weapon on behalf of something larger than itself. "Your father is the king's hand," Davos said quietly into the quiet. "Your father is a good man." "Yes," Jon said, and the word frayed. "Yes, Stannis turned his head a fraction. "We have fish," he said, as if ordering a retreat, "and bread that was not kissed by rats. Eat." Jon ate. He slept later on a pallet too hard even for a boy brought up on northern mattresses. He dreamed of wolves and stags and lions and a dragon coiled under a mountain looking at him with the red pity of an old god. He woke with the shape of a noose in his throat and sat for a long time in the gray before dawn listening to the sea try to get into the castle. Ravens came. One brought a strip of parchment with words like punches. The hand had been seized. The prince was proclaimed traitor by a queen whose son had been proclaimed king by a council that had been paid for the proclamation. The city watch barred the gates to men who were not lions. The north was stirring. The riverlands smoked. The Eyrie sent simpers. The rock sent steel or the promise of it. The Vale sent wind. The Stormlands sent questions with too many answers. The Reach, as always, sent sweet flowers to lay over a corpse. Jon went to the seawall and let the salt lie on him. Davos came to stand near him with a quiet a boy might lean against. "They will think you weak," Davos said gently, looking out to where the dawn was sharpening a horizon that never came closer. "They mistake youth for that." "I am weak," Jon said, and turned his mouth into a smile without humor. "But I am also angry." "Good," Davos said. "Anger gives a man courage he would not otherwise possess. It does nothing for his caution. For that, he must choose." He scratched at his beard. "You will have letters to write." "To whom?" Jon asked. "To men who hate the North less than they hate the Queen? To men who remember a dragon like a story and would like to carve a dragon as a sign above their doors." He closed his eyes. "To Robb." "I," Davos said. "To Robb." "I have no seal," Jon said. Davos smiled, one corner of his mouth only, like he had forgotten how to smile full. "You have a title," he said. "It is heavier than wax. That and a good hand." So Jon wrote. He wrote to the River Lord who had a daughter promised to a king who had died, and he wrote to a northern lord with more stone than patience, and he wrote to a man in the Vale who loved his own name more than safety. He wrote to Robb with a hand that nearly shook and did not. He wrote careful, measurable words that made promises only a man who did not expect to sleep well could keep. "I am alive. Father is in the lion's den. Cersei has barred me from the throne with lies. The king charged me protector. They threw his charge to the floor. Hold the north. Trust the walls of your heart and the walls of Winterfell in equal measure. Do not march unless you must. If you must, make the river your sword. Do not spend men dearer than your pride." He signed it with Prince of Dragonstone and hated the shape of the letters less for the first time. At noon that day, he went to Stannis and said, "You are right. It belonged to you. The law says so, but the law also says a king's word makes and unmakes. I will hold it until I can return it with honor. In return, hold it with me. No man ever defended a rock alone." Stannis stared at him as one might stare at the sea and find it offering sense. "I will not be your subject," he said. "I am not asking you to be," Jon said. "I am asking you to be my ally." Stannis's mouth set. "There is a difference," he conceded reluctantly. "If you forget that difference, I will be your enemy." "I will try not to forget," Jon said. "I find my memory improved when I am not dead." Stannis snorted. It might have been humor in a man whose humor had been taken out with a knife long ago. "You speak as if you were older," he said. "That is a start." They stood together that evening on the seawall. Fireflies pricked the night over the water the way small wars prick a realm. "They will come," Stannis said, watching sails where there were only gulls. "Men with lions and men with flowers and men with words. And we will answer," Jon said. He did not say how. He did not know. He watched the tide bruise itself against the rock. Again and again, he set his hand on the stone. He thought of Ned Stark in a red tower. He thought of Arya with a wooden sword. He thought of Sansa schooling her mouth into courtesy until it stopped being a mouth and became a mask. He thought of Robb putting on their father's sword and taking it up the way a son takes up his father's hand to kiss it one last time. He thought of ghostly lyres and rubies catching sun, and of a man who had loved a woman so hard it had broken kingdoms. He thought of a law written by men more ambitious than wise, and of a world in which boys were prey to the uses of their names. He did not pray. He was done with turning his heart inside out in the hope the gods would notice the red there. He stood. He breathed. He watched. The first raven from the north came 3 days later, wet and angry and nearly dead from effort. Rob's hand was bigger than it had been, clumsier with urgency. Mother wants to come south to plead for father. I will not let her. The Freys are hedged and I do not trust them. The Umbers rattle their spears at clouds. Sansa is, the line broke and restarted like a man tripping at a run. Sansa is said to be with the queen. Arya is nowhere. Gods, Jon, do something. He pressed the parchment flat with both hands. His throat hurt. He wrote, I am doing the only thing I can do. I am breathing. I am keeping Dragonstone out of the queen's hands. That is something. Do not come south. That will be a greater thing. At night he dreamed of Winterfell, of the breath of the godswood and the soft pad prick of ghost on old snow. He woke to the sea's old hunger, and that too was familiar enough to be comfort. Men came to Dragonstone. Lean knights who had been offended by the queen's tone. Selsales who respected coin more than kings and would respect a prince, at least until the coin ran out. A short, sardonic reachman with no love for Highgarden, who wore a sprig of wilted herb on his doublet to irritate men who loved fresh flowers. They argued in the hall. Stannis glared. Davos soothed. Jon learned to say no without making enemies and yes without making promises. A skill that had not been required of him in the yard or at the weirwood's roots. Varys's bird found him even there. It brought a scrap of silk with too much perfume and a curl of a message in a thin hand. The game is played in rooms where the board changes with the candlelight. If you will be a player and not a piece, come back by a door where men do not count coin. Jon burned it. He was not going back through any door Varys opened until he had men at his back who would close it behind him. Crows balanced on the parapets as autumn crept, black against the bruise of evening. The world confected wars out of old dust. The Prince of Dragonstone stood on his rock and learned what it was to be a name. When the next flock of ravens came, they came like a weather change. This time it was not one, not two, but a black embroidery across the morning. They brought 6 letters that mattered. The first was from Hoster Tully, formal, stiff, full of hectoring and hope. The Riverlands would not be trampled under Tywin's heel without answer. The second Stark was Rob's, shorter, harder. They have father. They will not give him. We march. The third was from the Vale, from a man who signed Peter and imagined himself writing love. It was a promise of nothing with the shape of something. The fourth was Stannis's, written in his own hand this time though he sat 5 chambers away. The true line of succession must be upheld. If the boy on the throne is not the boy born of the queen by the king, he has no claim. The king named you. If we cannot stomach that taste, we must make the taste that law will swallow. The fifth was from Pike. Balon's scrawl like rope burns. The sea does not ask. Takes. We take. Jon read it and tasted bile. The sixth was in a hand that made his hear. T lurch as if the rocks had shifted beneath his feet. Sansa's. Said very little. It said, I am to be wed to the king. Please do not come. Please do not leave me here. It was a letter of a girl trying to be a lady while drowning. He took that last one to the seawall because the sea was blunt and he needed blunt. He let the salt air dry his eyes before they might think to weep. What will you do? Davos asked, without preface, as he had learned to ask boys who had to be men without wanting to be. I will do what I said I would do, Jon answered. I will hold this rock. I will send letters like spears. I will try not to remember the sound of a wolf dying because a prince must be made. He swallowed. I will move when I can move the world with me. Good, Davos said softly. Men who gallop after their anger forget to see the ditches. Stannis came to stand on Jon's other side. The law favors you, he said, as if it pained him to grant the gift. The realm does not. You may make the realm obey the law. I am learning to enjoy impossible tasks, Jon said. It is that or learn to enjoy drowning. Above them, the sky dragged itself into evening in a color Jon had learned at Winterfell and missed. The world does not care what boys want. The world cares what men will do. The Prince of Dragonstone stood between a lord who collected duties the way other men collect songs and a smuggler who had been made a knight for saving men from themselves. And he listened to the sea try the wall again and again, unashamed of its persistence. Behind that wall, a fire burned with careful, contained prudence. Behind that fire, a boy began to pace and plan and write and wait like winter waits, without hurry, with a knowledge of itself that needs no reassurance. In King's Landing, when darkness thickened and the heat at last bled out of the stone, a girl with auburn hair sat quietly at her window and told herself a story in which a prince came on a ship with a wolf on its prow to break the city open like a pomegranate and let the seeds out into the sea. She did not know what it would look like, that breaking. She did not know if she would live to see it. She said the words anyway because girls learn early to make spells out of hope. In Winterfell, a boy took up a sword with both hands and looked south until his eyes watered. He raised it, and when he brought it down, he chose to think he cut not air but a road. And in the silent spaces between such things, where letters dry and sails fill and sleep comes in shallow strips to men too wired with wakefulness, the last of the dragons turned in a dream and looked north, not in malice, not in love, but in recognition.